So, so beautiful to be with you all on this Friday, if it's Friday, wherever you are in the world. So Julie and I are excited to jump into today's topic, which is the identity field. And we were just talking before we hopped on here. We feel like this could be like days long workshop and immersion. But let's together begin with a short centering, grounding to establish the field and the coherence between all of us here on this call before we officially dive in. So wherever you are, just beginning to find your center. You may place one hand on the heart, one hand on the solar plexus, your belly. Beginning to connect with the rhythms of your breath and allowing the mind to settle like sand settling on the bottom of the ocean. Feeling the rise and fall with the inhale and exhale coming into the center line of your body. Spine over the hips, crown of the head towards the sky. Dropping your energy into the earth to connect with Earth's electromagnetic field. And connecting with the field of your own heart. And any intention that has brought you into this moment, into this space. And then using the power of our intentions to connect all of our heart fields together as we move through this session. And when you're ready, coming back into our space. All right. So we have quite a few things to flow through today. Julie and I are going to be teaching about the identity field here for about the first hour or so. And then we're going to share a bit about how you may deepen, your work through specifically these various doorways of quantum field medicine. And then in the last 30 minutes of our session, we're going to be running a live transmission through the Quantum Vault. And so we'll talk more about that, and Julie will share more about that when we get there. So if you have any questions that come up between now during the teachings and the last piece when we go into transmission, just write them down and we'll get to them in the last 30 minutes of our session. So, all right, the identity field. So let's start. So for almost 2 decades, it's interesting. I've worked very closely with the identity field in my work. First starting out as a psychotherapist and working in private practice. And then, during my own process of evolution, of awakening, of learning, of progressing, really seeing the multidimensionality of the identity field and that it is so far beyond what conventional psychology teaches us. And, good for Freud. He gave us some good foundations around the ego, the id, the superego. Hats off. And then there's so much more to expand upon in terms of what the identity field actually is and what contributes to these constructs that make up who we believe ourselves to be. That's a pretty layered and complex discussion because it's so far beyond just our roles, our labels, our dynamics with family, friends, society, the systems that we're immersed in. All of that in the identity field comes from our conditioning, our programming. And it becomes very locked in, as we're, of course, these open fields as children. We absorb, most of the constructs and belief systems that we carry by the age of 7. And that, you know, for parents, that can feel like a lot of responsibility. And also, there's so much more than just the family of origin that leads to the programming of children, humans in general. So we can think about this question, and I invite you to think about this in this moment, the question of who am I? So the question, who am I, is one of the most ancient questions that has been contemplated by mystics and healers and teachers and masters across time. Who am I? And then really sitting with what comes up, what terms, what roles, what names come up for you when you sit with that question. And then knowing that you are so much more than what arises. So truly, I believe that the truth that you are not who you think you are is one of the most liberating, objective truths that we can embody. And part of this takes a conscious process of befriending and internalizing your relationship with the unknown. And even in this moment, when you hear that, your nervous system may be like, I don't know, that's, gives you a jolt or anxiety or a little bit of discomfort in your body. And so as I continue to share more about the layers of the identity fields, we're also weaving in ways to really work with our own identity field. Because each evolution, if you will, each threshold of evolution that we cross requires an embodiment of a new vibration of our identity. That we're shedding old identities consistently and we're evolving into new identities consistently. If we are, in fact, dedicated to the journey of evolution and our progression. So we are not who we think we are, and we are actually in this space and even in this moment in limitlessness. Okay, so if you think about the constriction of the ego is the capital I. It is all about survival. The ego is all about me being the center of the universe, and everything around me is, a part of that play that I'm playing out in my mind and that we're all playing out in our minds. So if we can decentralize ourselves from the fictitious universe that we create, the play that we're creating in physical form on Earth, given the conditioning we carry and the trauma imprints, right? Because we're creating characters in our mind with the relationships that we have in life. If we can begin to decentralize ourselves, then that's when we begin to tip into the capacity of limitlessness as souls in a human form, a human meat suit, if you will. So just really thinking about that. How can I decentralize myself from my own story and even from my own life? It helps us to move into more flow, more ease, more expansion. Yes, we still have free will and we still make proactive choices, but can we do that from a place of intention rather than survival instincts of old identities that are no longer serving us to the highest capacity. So, so really thinking about that, the spectrum of survival identities into limitless identities and everything in between, all those roles and labels in between. So this is where in my own journey, I began, as I started a deeper meditation practice and began working with earth medicines, plant medicines, understanding consciousness and the nature of consciousness in human form. I was like, oh my goodness, there's so much more to identity than what I learned in my psychology classes in school. So that's when I began studying transpersonal psychology, which is the totality of the person, right? The wholeness of the person on these various layers, yes, psychological, spiritual, soul-based, how they relate to the psyche and to overall consciousness. So really understanding that multidimensionality. And then, okay, so if we are all of these things multidimensionally, how do we approach healing? How do we approach and relate to the process of healing? And that goes back to meeting people where they're at, right? So meeting people where they're at, understanding there's a spectrum of frequency. And as we move through the quantum field, we'll see different resistances that come up in our psyche, so in our mind, attached to our identity as we progress on the spectrum of evolution. So, for example, let's see. I mean, there's so many great examples, but I'm working with a beautiful woman who lives in Asia. She lives in Singapore, and she has chosen to leave corporate to really explore, her own soul's purpose and blueprint in the world, what she's meant to create. So our work right now is uncoupling her core self. When I say core self, I mean your soul self, your core being, your authentic self, from the identity attachments that she has internalized from her corporate world. That, for example, my worthiness is attached to my productivity, right? I mean, that's hardwired after 30 years in very rigorous corporate settings. So that's just one example of how we see aspects of our own identity coming into the forefront. It's like brushing up against, these dense barriers or these belief systems like, okay, there's some releasing that needs to be done here because I'm proactively choosing a life, a reality, a circumstance that is in alignment with my soul. So we have to work with the identity field proactively along the way. And I know we all have, great examples of this. A big one to think about is our relationship to money and our relationship to receiving. Now, not just receiving money, but receiving opportunity, perhaps, or receiving love or joy. There are inevitably parts of our identity that prohibit full surrendered receiving because maybe we still have some survival aspects of programming that exist in our psyche. So proactively working, whether you work with others or not, but working with ourselves in the identity field here. And then moving more into the transpersonal piece. So understanding that consciousness is its information, its energy. So through a healthy identity field, we can direct energy in certain ways to create, right? To create relationships, businesses, circumstances. And if we do the work of reprogramming subconscious beliefs that are based in fear and we continue the movement towards adopting and embodying the true frequency of living in more love, more peace, more harmony, more joy, then the consciousness we're bringing into the collective becomes an amplified light. So I constantly get this vision, especially, if I'm traveling in a plane or just, in day-to-day life, but it's like if you're looking down, when you're in a plane and it's dark, it's nighttime, and you see a city and all of the lights. I see just this image of one light and then it just building on itself and all of these lights just all around the world getting illuminated. That is our capacity. That is our power. And it truly does begin in the work that we do with the identity field. Because again, if we can do all the meditations or ceremonies or therapies or take all the supplements, whatever it is you love to do for your own well-being. But unless we're doing the deep inner work of subconscious reprogramming, we're just having these experiences that may feel good or may feel supportive. So this is why I say the work works when you actually do it. So, and it's constant, it's throughout our lifetime. We're never done with it. We just enter into different phases. So understanding that working with the identity field directly impacts consciousness, our consciousness, and collective consciousness. So yeah, in the realm of quantum field medicine, identity is not a noun. It is truly a living field. And it's constantly in relationship with every level of the psyche, from the most painful personal wound to the most universal consciousness. And the work is to expand the capacity of the identity field to include more of what is real, what is true, what is source, what is divine, without collapse, without fragmentation. And I feel that there's a quote out there. I don't know who it's from, but it's something along the lines of true healing evolution equates to how much truth you can face and embody without running away. And I get it. When the ego gets challenged, we want to run away. We do not want to stay present. We want to do everything under the sun to numb it, to distract ourselves, to go back into the illusion of comfort. I remember when I was going through one of my own, we'll call them initiations and ego dissolutions. Gotta love it when your ego dissolves. It's, quite the experience. But it was when I was choosing to leave my first marriage, and all the communities and relationships and identities I had about who I am were so attached to the approval of all of those people, all of those communities. And my work was to uncouple my identity from those attachments. And then life completely rearranges around you, which can be very uncomfortable with all of that, death and rebirth. But that is the true inner work of being a steward of expanded consciousness, being a steward of working with your own identity field. So you can have the capacity, because it takes resilience, to embody and hold a high level of truth with a capital T from source, which means a high frequency of light quotient. So that's the nervous system work there. So as we're working with the identity field, we also need to be working with the nervous system to train its bandwidth and capacity to hold more light. Because as we get the fear-based thoughts and subconscious beliefs that are outdated out of the way, we're going to have more space for light to come through the vessels of our bodies. So, all right, so we could go all into the ego. Um, I want to debunk the myth that the ego is not our enemy, the ego is not bad. It's really one of the most important course correction aspects to our psyche. And the ego, really has this profound role of being one of our greatest teachers. So when we see the fear-based instincts, thoughts, actions, beliefs come into our awareness, we can use that to course correct ourselves. Like, okay, there's the inner critic popping her head up again to try to take the reins. I'm going to recalibrate back to how can I think, speak, and act from my heart's, my soul's deepest intentions. And that's the course correction. So we're getting the purity, the light of the soul in the human being in alignment. And whatever's in between that space is our work. It's our subconscious, it's our trauma wounds, it's our relationship, you know, maladaptive patterns. So we're getting the ego, sorry, the soul blueprint, and then the ego and the human self in alignment. So we don't want to destroy the ego. We want to soften it so it doesn't run the show. As a human, the ego's purpose is to serve the visions and the guidance of the heart. And the heart is the portal into the soul. So really thinking about that because, seeing out there in the world, most things, most systems are ruled by fear, control, and ego. Now that's rapidly changing, and that's why we're having this discussion. This is why we're here doing this work together. And so really thinking about the purpose of the ego, and this is a really simple embodied tool to use, but when you notice yourself maybe getting kind of wrapped up in your thoughts or your ego or fear, just use your intention to drop that mental energy, that thinking energy down into the back of your heart. So just think about like a sweeping waterfall of energy moving from the mind into the heart and then pushing the mental energy out of the heart. And then that's the cycle. So mind, ego supports the heart, the soul, not the other way around. And so we can do that throughout the day, whether you're in a meeting with a client or you're driving down the road or with your family, dropping your mind energy into the back of the heart is really powerful and very helpful. All right, so we're going to move along here to the soul. So again, this could take days. I would love to, these are whole workshops, multi-day topics, but briefly. So before you arrived in this body, there was already a blueprint. So soul architecture is the pre-incarnational design structure of the soul's chosen curriculum for a given lifetime. So it's really the blueprint that existed before the body formed, before the family was entered, before the first breath was taken. It encodes the soul's primary gifts, its chosen wounds, its relational agreements, and the specific thresholds of initiation it came to meet. So much is embodied in the architecture of the soul before it even comes into your human body. And to me, that feels quite humbling, and that in itself can help get us out of our ego. We're not as important or centralized as we think we are. We're just part of the whole field of evolution. So the word architecture is interesting because, I've as I work deeply with souls, individual souls, collective souls, That's kind of how I see it, because there's different parts that architect the wholeness of the soul. So soul architecture, it's not fate, it is the original intention. And the soul chose a really broad curriculum. So we all have a very broad curriculum, key themes, core relationships, primary initiations, how we are going to meet agreements in this lifetime. And the architecture is really the invitation, and the response is consciously yours. So we come in with this architecture, this blueprint, and then we use free will and our own consciousness to direct how we navigate all of that, and how we really receive the lessons. So the soul blueprint is the core frequency of the soul, and its dharmic signature. When I say dharmic signature, it's the unique vibrational quality of that specific consciousness and what that consciousness is meant to share with the world in the various ways we all do in our own lives. The dharmic signature. It expresses as the soul's primary gifts. If you think about, what your primary gifts are in this life, you can think about that as a core aspect of your dharmic signature. The capacities that feel very natural, effortless, nourishing when expressed. But there's a caveat. A lot of times, our primary dharmic gifts require the alchemization of some of our greatest fears. So, for example, and I can use my own journey. My dharmic signature in this lifetime carries a lot of visibility, blueprint. And then there has also been historically a part of me that was terrified, terrified of being visible on a grand scale or speaking. I had a lot of work I needed to do with my throat chakra, because of persecution and past lives and ancestral. I mean, there was so much distortion that I had to really see and move through. So it becomes effortless when we move to a certain threshold, right? And a lot of times it's our greatest fear that we need to confront in order to embody the dharmic signature at its greatest expression. So moving on to the soul's wound architecture, which is really interesting. The soul doesn't choose wounds randomly, it chooses them with precision. Now, this can be an interesting concept for humans to really understand, because of the pervasive victimhood consciousness that we've all been touched by and we all internalize in some way. But it's true, our soul chooses the precision of the different traumas and experiences that we have in this life. And so in that breath, it's important to have a very healthy practice of compassion, self-compassion, because there's just a lot of density and a lot of suffering and pain that we may have gone through or are going through because of the wound architecture that our soul carries. So it's saying that, within the energetic field of any significant wound, there is a corresponding gift that can only be accessed through that particular doorway. So that's the darkness and the light. That's the non-duality. That is the embodiment of your initiation. You're meant to go through that perhaps very difficult curriculum to get to the other side of that accessed gift that's specifically connected to the wound that was architected by your soul. So as we know, the healer who has known profound suffering often carries a very potent energy of compassion because of what they have endured in their earth school curriculum and the soul wounding that they chose. So moving to the relational grid. So the relational grid grid is the web of souls and the individuals who come together in your orbit at different chapters, and the network of pre-arranged agreements that express themselves through key relationships in a particular lifetime, parents, siblings, partners, children, teachers, and even what we may see as enemies and adversaries here for very important and divine reasons. So that can help us, again, have greater compassion for ourselves and for those around us. So there's a 3-floor framework in the really structure of identity, especially from the soul lens. So we want to see the ground floor. So the first aspect of the framework, you can think of it as the base of the pyramid, is the human self. So we think about our ego, personality, conditioning, survival responses, behavioral patterns. So that ground floor is the very human, dense human nature that we are, the human self. The second floor, so I think about that, is the central piece of the pyramid. The central heart of the pyramid is the soul self. So the soul self is the soul blueprint, karmic patterns, soul contracts, and your dharmic signature, what you are meant to share with the world through your innate gifts. The third floor is the apex and the top of the pyramid, and that's the oversoul. We may call that the higher self. So pure awareness, non-localized, true knowing, pure consciousness from source level intelligence. And this is why the identity field is so key to work with because we may have an open crown, think apex of the pyramid. We may be connected to our soul blueprint, the central heart of the pyramid. But if we have not worked with the human layer at the base of the pyramid, that includes identity, ego, those patterns of our humanness, then we will never be able to ground the source-led guidance into physical form. And it'll just get continually stuck. Usually in the solar plexus is where we get blocked because that's where the ego lives and that's where fear and survival live in the energetic and physical body. So this is why it's so important we work with all aspects. And this is the antithesis of spiritual bypassing because we are taking all three into consideration and working with all three very consciously. So how does the soul architecture express in the body? I really, to me, it's so vital, it's so important for us to truly see that the body is not separate from soul architecture. They are not separate. They are an integrated living expression connected to the curriculum of the soul. So if you can continue to remind yourself of that 3-part pyramid, the framework of the identity, and in this identity use, it's the totality of our multidimensional identity. Again, the human self as the foundation, the soul as the center, the oversoul as the apex. We can work with all three with precision and intention so we can bring forward what we're meant to create in the world and really live in most harmony and alignment with the soul in this human form. So there's so much more about soul contracts, but I want to pause there. Yeah, and shift into, Julie, what you have to share with us around the biofield and the quantum realm and quantum medicine. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for your shares. It's, really flowing organically today with this because the identity field is so vast and expansive. Just kind of touching on what Lena was sharing, the identity field is the quantum architecture of who you believe yourself to be. And beyond consciously, this is at the morphic field level. So this includes what Lena was speaking on: soul contracts, ancestral vows, lineage programs, core wounding, the energetic agreements that our system made before we even came in, about what's safe, what's possible, what's true. Um, One other talking point of this is just thinking about ourselves as an operating system, beneath the software. That's what that identity is. So we can update apps, we can change our diet, we can change our mindset, we can take supplements, whatever it is that we're doing. But if the operating system is running the program that says, I'm someone who suffers, I'm sick, I'm someone who can't receive, I shouldn't share my voice, the body is going to organize itself around that every single time. And it's so imperative when we're working with our clients, when we're with our family, friends, our network, of just being conscious of really what your identity is. The question of who am I? That's it's such a powerful question. And I didn't realize it was all the way back to the ancients, but it was something, even embedded with the program that I went through when I started my healing journey. When I went through, two rapes and, alcohol addiction and things. And I remember I was sitting with the judge one day, and he held up a mirror, in front of me, and on the mirror it says, "Who am I?" And I remember when we started that program, we had to sit in front of that judge, 13 years ago, and tell that judge who we thought we were. Now, this is someone who has been through, a number of traumas and alcohol and different things, just to kind of calm the mind. But in reality, I had no idea who I was. And when I answered that question 13 years ago, it was a very different answer than I would give now. But I didn't know who I was, and there was really never that support system. And I don't want to say, I had a beautiful family, a lot of love, but I was always the black sheep of the family. And I feel like many of us who are stepping into these really advanced roles and our true identities probably walked in or came in, to this lifetime with as a black sheep, and not really understanding what our true identity was. And I want to touch on this specifically right now because I feel like it's very pertinent for the generations coming in, the children coming in right now, that generation from probably 25 years old down is a very different identity pattern. I have two children that are 21 and 17. Something I have observed their entire schooling, and even before that, was really not identifying with being female or male. I mean, I have two daughters, born daughters, but I read a book when I started my healing journey, Bringers of Dawn, by Barbara Marciniak, if anybody's followed her. But this book was written in the 80s. And this book was probably my biggest activation when I started my journey. And in that book, it discusses, how we all came in originally with the specific DNA codes and fire codes and all the gifts and abilities that we came in with. And that was hijacked, and that was done on purpose. And it shifted into these roles of masculine and feminine. And what is the masculine role? What does that mean? What's the feminine role? And, girls wear pink and boys wear blue. This was the programming. And this generation of kids coming in right now, a lot of them do not identify either way. They are fluid, and they come from star systems that are fluid. There is a whole narrative and agenda to break the children down from being able to reflect that out, that they don't identify with a certain programming or a certain identity. They're balanced. They're balanced in their polarity, and that's why they don't identify one way or the other. And that's not wrong. That is the evolution, and that is the morphic field amplifying into what the new earth architecture is, and the quantum architecture of all of our identities. So I say that to say that these children coming in, they are the future, and giving them a space where they feel safe, where they can blossom into who they truly are, and their identity. It also shifts our morphic resonance, as adults and parents, grandparents, to know that they have that safe space. And it's not there for everybody yet. And like I said, there's been a lot of narrative and agenda trying to break that down, but that's what it is. Vitality for our kids, for us, it's not just biological. This is an identity state. And just a few talking points on how identity patterns show up as morphic field distortions. So we talked about Rupert Sheldrake's morphic field theory, which gives us the language that fields carry memory. So morphogenetic fields don't just organize the biology. They carry, as Lena was saying, the informational blueprint the body's building from. When our identity pattern is running, say I must earn my right to exist, or my body is dangerous, or my body is sick. It creates a distortion signature in the morphic field, and the body then builds and rebuilds itself according to that distorted blueprint. So some identity patterns that people might carry. So I must carry everyone. That's an identity pattern. That morphic field distortion is a compression usually around the shoulder and the upper back field. The physical expression is chronic tension, frozen shoulders, and cervical collapse. Another identity pattern, I'm not safe to be seen. So there's a collapse in the anterior heart and the throat field. This is a physical expression of autoimmune and thyroid dysregulation and immune confusion. The identity pattern of I have to hold it all together. This creates rigidity throughout the core and field architecture, and it causes adrenal fatigue, digestive disorders, connective tissue issues. Another identity pattern, my needs don't matter. This is a depletion signature in the sacral and root field. And it causes hormonal imbalance, reproductive issues, chronic exhaustion. Last, I inherited this suffering. So this is an ancestral loop that's active in the cellular memory field. This causes a lot of the generational diseases and patterns that don't respond to treatment because it is an ancestral loop that's living in the field. So these aren't metaphors. These are field level realities that the quantum vault, that's been created that I work with can read, and the body is faithfully expressing through. So morphic resonance, what does that mean? That you're in resonance with every ancestor who ran a similar pattern before you. The field doesn't distinguish between your experience and theirs. It amplifies the pattern across time. And this is why, a lot of us can do everything right. Therapy, body work, nutrition, meditation, technologies, and so we're still going to hit a ceiling. And that's because they're not just healing their wound, they are the current expression point of the lineage-wide field distortion. Some examples of this might be survival scarcity running through a lineage that experienced famine or persecution. Women in this line don't have power over their bodies, so this is transmitted as reproductive hormonal patterns. And grief that was never metabolized. So this is running as chronic heaviness, depression, lung and heart patterns. And then the warrior protector identities.
What do you think if you have all of these?
Yeah, a lot of us
And
do.
what do you do about it?
A lot of us do. And yeah, that's
Yeah.
what we're going to flow into too,
They
because
all are clustered. I mean,
yeah.
I would think for most of the people I see on the screen, at least.
Yeah.
Hi, Steph.
Yeah, it's very true. And the vault reads, these lineage loops directly. That's why, I do a lot of work with the vault, and it's such a multi-layered system. But it's not just the symptom in front of us. And this is what a lot of practitioners, and doctors are not addressing, but it's the field signature of where it originated from. And we hear the term all the time, we're the ones breaking the mold. The black sheep are the ones coming in to break the mold, break the barriers, and do it differently, even if there is absolutely no one around them that supports that understands that. We at our core do. And so a lot of us have really had to pull the drive to make the shifts on an ancestral and generational level. So I'll flow into how the quantum vault works with this. So the vault doesn't treat symptoms in isolation. every scan begins at the field level. It reads the morphic architecture, the identity layers, the ancestral threads, the physical expressions, all simultaneously, as you were saying, Jennifer. The quantum blueprint stream receives medical recalibrations. So this is at the physical layer, where the vault stream conduits are simultaneously streaming etheric recalibrations, which are going into the identity field and the morphic architecture. And this is why there's so many profound testimonials with the vault, and the clients reporting shifts, sometimes immediately or within 24 hours, that go way beyond what they expected. And that's not just a symptom that improved, it's something in how they experience themselves shift. And that is the identity field work that we're working through. I have so many people that say, I don't know what's happening, but a lot of times people will say, this is the first time I have felt heard, I have felt seen. Everything that I've read resonates. And, they may have nobody in their circle that believes what they're doing is part of what they're supposed to be doing. But inside we know that it is. So having the vault work is really profound in this way, because it allows people to really understand and come into who they are at the core. Lena talked about having different experiences in this lifetime, and even though they may be people, places, or things that we didn't feel that were of light, we've been through certain traumas, but they were there for a reason. For, maybe it was a past lifetime. I know that I've had lifetimes as both the masculine and the feminine role. And so even going through this lifetime and some of the things that I've experienced, I believe probably had something to do when I was in a masculine energy field. And I needed to see what that looks like from the female or the feminine viewpoint, also while keeping a balanced polarity. There's some layers, as is saying, it's so layered. So the vault, it can read active soul contracts that are affecting the physical health, ancestral morphic loops in the lineage field, identity conclusions embedded in specific organ systems and fields, where the body's self-healing intelligence is being overridden and why, and the sovereign blueprint beneath all of it, what the body is trying to return to that field and that person. So I invite you guys to just take notice if there's any health pattern in your life that keeps returning, no matter what you try. Is there some things in your field that just always keep circling back? That pattern, it has a field address. It has an identity signature. It can be read, recalibrated, and released, not just managed. So that's what we do when we go into the vault. We go into the field level first. The scans, the transmissions, they're not just information, they're activations, they're field level recalibrations of the identity architecture. And that's what makes them work when nothing else has worked. And if, with Lena's work and how because it's anybody that's experienced the vault, it's such a profound shift. And the integration is such a powerful piece, because if we start to return back to those old patterns, then we're not going to see the shift that we were expecting, or not even expecting, but that were due for us to come through. And Lena's beautiful work is why this is so important to run parallel, because she works in such a deep layered space of the soul architecture, and she understands how those blueprints work and flow, and really creates, I feel like, a deeper level of integration beyond what we're sending into the stream. That's a first layer. But then when we start to integrate in with, the various modalities that Lena has, it takes the body to a whole other morphic space. And it really begins to emit that morphic field, and impacting those before us and those coming after us. Lena, do you have anything that you want to touch on from that before we flow into some of our work and plasma broadcast?
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Julie. Do you want to flow into more about the vault and how to enter into that work? So Julie and I are going to take a couple of minutes to talk about what are some various doorways that we're offering in order to deepen into this quantum field medicine work in the various forms that we share.
I'm gonna share my screen real quick just so that you guys can see a little bit of the vault here. Can everybody see the screen here? Okay. So in working with the Quantium Vault, we've got different layers. So we have the client mode. So people can just come right onto the website. They'll enter in their information, and this is how we tap into your quantum blueprint. For those of you that were on our call or a session a couple weeks ago, we saw the cryogenic plasma broadcast system be implemented, which we'll show at the end here, as well as we do another broadcast. But this is just for individual transmissions and recalibrations. We have multiple volumes that go into advanced regenerative health, kind of volumes 1 and 2. Volume 2 is a bit more advanced. So this is moving into the cryogenetics, morphogenetics, mirror and tesseract, gateways, the advanced gateway brain sync, where we're rebalancing the left and right brain hemispheres. And there's a deeper layer here in the second volume. Volumes 3 through 6, these are focused more on New Earth architecture and systems. So we're really, again, going into the body's template, the blueprint, and every layer. And I'll peek at volume 1 just because we have 4 suites here, which again, I mentioned the advanced regenerative medicine. We also have some transmissions that flow more into protection, clearing, and rescue. So this is for people who have been through maybe sexual traumas, trafficking, abuse. Suite 3 is our planetary healing and earth stewardship suite on the first level. But this is moving people into New Earth architecture and framework and mission work. And then suite 4 is another layer of that. So this is where we're going into kind of more of what Lena was speaking on, of the soul blueprint, and that architecture and various codes and activations and things that we carry that we're waiting to, open up and bring forward. So there's many transmissions. We have also a flame pass series. So we go through 6 different scans in one pass. Again, focusing on different areas of the body or different fields that we want to focus on. We have the Halls of the Living Light, Cancer Reversal Codex, Business Alignment, which we can dive into, a little bit later. You're also more than welcome if you want to go to the Quantium Vault. You can log in and see these scans. As a practitioner, this is what we're moving forward right now, because we are, I'm really looking for those who are aligned to step in as guardian practitioners and bring this, whether into their practice, into their home. So I have guardian practitioners that are private users. They use this for their family, for, consistent maintenance of recalibration and activation and clearing. And then people, physicians, bioenergetic practitioners, any healthcare professional, really working to weave this into their work. We have some really beautiful physicians and practitioners who have been brought in on the first wave, and there are more flowing in, but they really understand the power of these transmissions and what they bring at the core level, and integrating in, what they already offer, but being able to stack this and really getting to the core imbalances and the core challenges that people are experiencing, and maybe don't even have words or identification of what that is. They may not know, why does this keep coming back? Like, what are those patterns and where are they really coming from? You had said something, you are not who you think you are. And it's a saying that I hear over and over again. We are not who we think we are. And it's so much more expansive and vast. And as we tap into these transmissions, it's an activation for us. I spoke on the book Bringers of the Dawn, and there was always a keyword in there that would activate from me. And that was that we are ambassadors of light. When I read that sentence for the first time, it was like something clicked in me. When I saw that word ambassador and I saw, ambassador of light, it's like, yes, that is what I'm here for. Like, that is what I'm here for. That's me. That calls to my soul. And the people that come in for the vault work, whether it's as a client or as a practitioner, I hear from every single person that steps into the field. As soon as I heard about this, it called to me. And that is how, that is how we know that this is for us. So if this feels, like it's something that you want to immerse in, whether as a client or a guardian practitioner, we'll send some information out, when we send the recording and different information, we'll put that in there. But it's a very advanced system there. This is all channeled. This has been probably 13 years plus another 40 plus lifetimes of, things that have come through as a channel from my healing journey and understanding and working with clients what they needed, at a level to get to the highest quantum timeline connected to their source field. This is what I was working to bring forward, and that's what this system is. So I'll flow this back over to Lena so that she can share more of her work and also how it weaves in with this work.
Amazing. Yeah, in my own personal experience in working with the Quantum Vault, it actually helped me accelerate the clarity around what I know I'm meant to bring into the world in terms of the structures of that blueprint, which is a beautiful segue, into I want to share a little bit about what is called the Legacy Council. So if you think about being that ambassador of light and bringing forward the highest timeline expression of what your dharmic gifts are in the world. So put simply, what you're meant to build, what you're meant to build in the world. A legacy, the energy of legacy, the structures and systems of legacy that far outlive you, that far outlive your own lifetime. It is done in community. And there's a beautiful, just expansive, accelerated process when we sit in council with other ambassadors of light, of other legacy leaders, of other powerful women who are doing that work for themselves. And so it becomes this amplifier mirror effect when we're in, if any, I know some of you have been part of councils before, but it becomes that collective journey together that expands you into that highest timeline. And in that, we live on earth, we live in this world, that human part, the base of the pyramid. And so the reality is we need community. We need capital, resources, money, energy. We need visibility. We need support from those who understand the frequency that we're bringing forward. And so when Source moved through me and was like, you have to create, one of the offerings and one of the creations that's meant to be brought forward is the Legacy Council, because we bring all of this beautiful quantum work into human form, into earthly form in this council. And so what's beginning on June 8th is the founding council. It's a group of women, so it'll be at max 13 women. And we will be moving together through an annual arc, an annual process, where we will be working with the morphic field in real time to accelerate, activate the architecture that we carry. So for example, the visibility piece, the voice piece, the money piece, the media piece, whatever is meant to be the fullest expression in your field and then built on Earth as a new civilization led by women, you know, in the balanced energies and in the coherence that we carry. That's what this chamber is for. And so, you know, I'm honored to be opening the doors to the founding council. I'm honored for Julie to be a part of the council with us. And the invitation is open. You know, there's a reason why each of you were drawn into this particular field of quantum medicine. If this is something that's speaking, you know, to a deeper part of your soul, you know, be happy to talk with you and share more information. So yeah, it takes, you know, the beautiful quantum medicine, and this is really what Julie was talking about. It is that intersection of what I call the great integration, you know, the great integration of receiving all of this source energy and actually putting it into practice in the world so we can truly leave the fullest expression of our legacy on Earth. So